We have looked at some important materials that we can see around us. So we looked at the car that helps us in transportation. We mentioned the laptop that helps us in communication. We've also mentioned the gas cylinder that contains gas that we use to cook. We also mentioned kerosene that provides fuel for mankind. Now, in today's lesson, we are looking at the living cell. By the end of the lesson, we expect that as a student, you should be able to define living cell. And then you should be able to classify organisms under the cells they possess. Or you should be able to classify organisms based on the cells they possess. So what then is a living cell? A living cell. So when we look at our body is made up of tiny particles that we cannot see with our naked eyes. And those are what we call cells. So we say that a cell is the smallest, and then it is the simplest basic unit of life. The unit of life. So for example, when you look at a human being, we perform all the life processes like breathing, reproduction, excretion. In the same way, when you take one single cell, which we cannot see with the naked eye, it is also able to perform all those life processes. That is why we say a cell is the smallest and simplest basic unit of life. So it is a unit of life. It's life on its own. Now, when we look at organisms, we can classify them based on the number of cells they possess. So we have multicellular organisms as one form of organism. So we have multicellular organism. Now, what are multicellular organisms? When we talk about multicellular organisms, multi means many. So they are the living cells that are possessing many cells, or they are living organisms that has many cells, not two, a lot of them, millions of cells. So multicellular organisms are organisms that possess many cells. Now, examples of multicellular organisms include the common ones we know, which are plants, and we also have animals. So we have plants and animals as common examples of multicellular organisms. And then on the other hand, we also have what we call unicellular organisms. Unicellular organisms. It is gotten from the word unit, which means one. So unicellular organisms are organisms that have made up of only one cell, or that have only one cell. So imagine having a living organism that is only one cell. That cell that you cannot see with your naked eye. So imagine how they are. So you realize that they look quite strange. They are not things we normally see around us. So examples of them include amoeba, we have paramecium, we have euglena, we have spirogyra, and then we also have trypanosoma. Now, some of these organisms are disease-causing organisms. When we say they are disease-causing organisms, it means that they are tiny particles that have hosts, and then they cause disease to their hosts when they get into them. Now, let's look at the structure of amoeba. This is the structure of amoeba. That is when you look at it under a light microscope. They look formless. You realize that you cannot give them any particular shape. And then we also have the structure of paramecium over here. So you realize that they are formless objects. They do not have any particular form. But then they are living cells. And the whole living organism is made up of only one cell. So in today's lesson, we have looked at organisms based on their cells. And we said that based on cells, we have multicellular organisms, and then we have unicellular organisms. And we said that the living cell is the smallest and the simplest basic unit of life. In our next lesson, we will be moving on to look at the types of cells we have. We will look basically at the animal cells. See you in the next lesson.